Um, are you interested in end time prophecy? Are you interested in knowing the categories of prophecy? Are you interested in knowing, for example, which prophecies relate to the church? Which ones relate to Israel specifically? Which ones relate to the world? And which ones relate to nature itself? Do you know the difference between end time prophecies and mere news, which a lot of people seem to think, for example, police brutality or a building falling down on someone? They have these sort of things in their signs of the end sort of blogs and videos and comments. That stuff is not end times prophecy. If you don't know end times prophecy, if you want to learn end times prophecy, and important, if you want to know the key signs, because even in the body of end time prophecies, there are certain key signs that you have to look out for, because those key signs have to happen first before something else happens, like the great falling away. That day will not come until there is a great falling away. So that's a key sign. Vast increase in knowledge and transportation is also a key sign, because the angel told Daniel, that day will not come, or in those days, knowledge will be increased and men will run to and fro. The gospel preached throughout the entire planet is also a key sign, because that day will not come until the gospel is preached throughout the whole planet, throughout the whole earth, and then the end will come. So there are end time prophecies, but within the end time prophecies there are a small number of key signs which let you know you're in the age. So in other words, you can have all the end time prophecies you want, but if you don't have the key signs accompanying every other end times prophecy within that same sort of generation, then you're not in the end times. So if you're missing the key signs, you're basically not in end times. So if that's something that interests you, you want to learn about it, click the link. I guess I'll put it here somewhere. It'll take you to a video on end times prophecies, which will help show you what end time prophecies actually are. If you don't know end times prophecies, and if you don't understand the scriptures, this video is going to be difficult for you. It's going to be difficult for you. It's going to be a little bit advanced, but you may get something out of it anyway. I'm not going to go into the end time prophecies. I'm just going to say this as a nutshell. Understand that when you're dealing with end time prophecies, you're dealing with basically the last 100 years. You're not dealing with 500 years, 300 years, 700 years ago. You're dealing with everything within that same sort of generation. End time prophecies are all supposed to be within the same generation. And that's important. In fact, that's fundamentally important for you to understand what I'm about to go into. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with this particular video. I'm going to mention some things that, again, for Christians, you should know all of this. If there are any Orthodox Jews who may be watching my videos, some of you are. I'm very cautious and respectful when I deal with Orthodox Jews, because I know your belief system. You may find that you learn something about Christianity in this video, but you Christians, you should know all of these things. The Orthodox Jews should know the Old Testament passages, definitely. Perhaps not as much in the New Testament. I'm just going to touch on some things. Hopefully you know each and every story. And then I'm going to kind of switch gears, and I'm going to tie it all in. So at first, it's going to seem like I'm just talking about stuff. You're not going to see how it's going to relate. But I will tie it all in after I've told you the few points. First things first. The creation story. All of you that I send these videos to, and all the Google Plus communities, not so much YouTube. YouTube is anybody. But the Google Plus community, I'm only members of Christian apologetics, biblical, Messianic, and a few communities that are about Israel, which are not really religious, and there's one that I'm a member of, which is Judaism. But all of you should know these things. So the creation story, you should all know it. How God created the heavens and the earth. That's one important thing, and I'll come back to that. So I'm starting with the creation story. Remember, that's important. Also, then there's Enoch, number 2. We all know the story of Enoch, even though we don't know a lot about Enoch, because he was snatched away. He was taken away. He was raptured. Okay, that's important. In fact, all of these things are important. I'm going to come back to that as well. But I'm just mentioning these just to jog your memory so that, okay, I remember the story about Enoch. If you don't, I'm going to post the scriptures anyway. Then, of course, along comes the messianic figure of the Old Testament, Moses. Remember that when God was going to introduce himself to Israel on the Mount, and Moses basically told Israel to get themselves ready, get themselves prepared, because God's going to come and he's going to, introduce himself to all of us. Think back on the story. Whatever you can remember, think back on the story. Then we fast forward to the New Testament, and we're at Jesus. When Jesus went up into the mountain and he was transfigured. Remember how, he was transfigured, he was shining like the sun, and then Moses and Elijah came and ministered to him, basically talking to him. Remember the story. That's important too. Also, the part about how Jesus said he would destroy the temple, which obviously caused a ruckus with the Jews, because, he's talking about destroying the temple. That's a big no-no. You don't say that. Think back to what you can remember about the story. Okay? Then there's Lazarus. Not the parable about Lazarus, how, the poor man Lazarus went to Abraham's bosom when he died, and the rich man went to Hades. Not that Lazarus. The real Lazarus, the one who died, that Jesus rose from the dead. Think back to what you remember about that story, because we'll come back to it. But here, if you understand all of these other things that I mentioned, the creation story, Enoch, Moses telling Israel to get ready, Jesus being transfigured on the mountain, Jesus saying he would destroy the temple, the story about Lazarus, fine. If you remember all of that, that's fine. If not, we'll come back to it anyway. But then we get to the tipping point. We get to the turning point, which is Peter. Here's where it all starts to get glued together. Here's where it starts to make sense. Peter said that one day to the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day. It seems like God is just throwing this stuff in the Word for like no reason, right? Why would Peter even say that? Because initially you're thinking, well, what Peter is saying is that, he's not slack concerning his promise as far as returning for Israel, returning for the church. Yes, Peter is saying that. But I don't even think Peter knew what he was saying when he was writing. In fact, a lot of them didn't, because it's by the Spirit. The Spirit is putting it through their pens for our benefit. So I don't even think Peter really understood what he meant when he said one day is unto the Lord like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day. But here's where it all starts to come back in. The scriptures say that God tells us the end from the beginning. He tells us the end from the beginning. That's why the creation story is so important. And that's why I mentioned that first. The creation story, as you know, we call it a 7-day creation, but the reality is God created for 6 days. And then he ceased his creation as we know it. He stopped creating. In the scriptures, basically, he rested on the 7th day. That's important. So it's 6 days that he worked, and on the 7th day was rest. That's important. From Enoch, we know Enoch was raptured. But what a lot of people don't know is that Enoch was seventh from Adam. He was the seventh, meaning like the seventh son. He was seventh from Adam. That is the important part. He was seventh. So think about it. What do you think that could possibly mean? And then Moses, when Moses was telling Israel, get ready because God's going to come and he's going to, dwell among us. What did Moses actually say? He said, wash and make ready for 2 days. And on the third day, God will come and he'll live in our sight. See, you got to understand, like God is throwing in these little clues, 2 days, 6 days, 7 days, for us to figure something out. And I think Jeffrey Bartell, he figured it out. When Jesus went up into the mountain, the scriptures say he waited for 6 days. So on the 7th day is when he went up into the mountain and he was glorified. Right? I hope you're following me. Jesus, when he talked about destroying the temple and how it will be rebuilt, he said it will be rebuilt in 3 days. He said in 3 days' time it will be rebuilt. Lazarus, for example, when Jesus heard that Lazarus was dead, he didn't go to Lazarus right away. He deliberately waited for 2 days. And then he went to resurrect Lazarus on the 3rd day. How does this all tie into any sort of point? From Adam to Jesus was 4,000 years, 4 days. From Jesus to us, it's been 2,000 years, 2 days. 4 and 2, 6. From Adam to us, it's been 6,000 years, 6 days. We are literally knocking on the 7th day. We're literally knocking on the 7th day. So when you look at creation, it's almost as if God has given us a clue to tell us how long we're going to be on the planet. Give you 6 days. And on the 7th day, that's when rest comes. That's when the millennial kingdom comes. That's when eternity starts. And the whole reason I mentioned that the prophecies have been occurring within the last 100 years so that hopefully you would figure out it's not a coincidence that all the end time prophecies have been happening at the end of the 6th day, because we're knocking on the 7th day door. Now please, you people who are cult minded, don't start setting crazy dates. I know some of you are, but this is really not for you anyway. For the saints, this is just to open your eyes a little bit and show, you know what? It's not a coincidence that the end time prophecies have been happening within the last 100 years. We're at the end of the 6,000 year period. We're at the end of the 6th day. We're literally tapping on the door of the 7th day. We're literally that close. That's why I mentioned that the end time prophecies have been happening in the last 100 years. So the creation story, 6 days. 7th day is rest. From Adam to us have been 6,000 years. It's been 6 days. Because remember, Peter said, 1 day is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is like 1 day. Enoch was 7th from Adam. He was raptured. Could that be a depiction of the rapture of the saints at the 7th day, at the 7,000 year period? Why else would Enoch be raptured? Nobody else was. I mean, Job was righteous too, but Job wasn't raptured. Abraham was righteous, considered righteous, but he wasn't raptured. Same thing with Noah. Well, actually, Noah was lifted up, but you know what I mean. But Enoch was 7th from Adam. That is the key that a lot of people miss. And then when Jesus going up into the mount, he waited 6 days. Why is that even in the scripture? Why does the scripture even tell us he waited for 6 days? And then he went up on the 7th day, because I believe God is giving us clues. A glorified Jesus on the 7th day would represent the glorified Jesus returning on the 7th day, or within the 7th day. I think that's exactly what it's pointing to. And we are literally knocking on the 7th day door. In fact, let me just sidetrack a little bit. To a lot of you Sabbatarians, like Seventh-day Adventists, the fact that you miss these clues in scriptures is because you're so focused on a Jewish Sabbath, which has nothing to do with you, because the Sabbath is a sign between God and Israel, the descendants of Jacob, for all generations. It has nothing to do with you. But you don't see these things because you're so focused on a day, it's impossible for you to see what God is actually trying to tell his people. To me, this stuff is clear as day. To me, it's clear as day. I can't tell you this is the gospel truth because the gospel doesn't say it, or the word of God doesn't say it. But to me, this is clear as day. So Jesus going up into the mountain on the seventh day represents his glorious appearance on the seventh day, the 7,000-year period. Same thing with Lazarus. He waited 2 days and he resurrected Lazarus from the dead. That could be representing resurrecting the dead saints on the third day. So here's where we get the seventh day and the third day. Moses said to wash and to make ready for 2 days, and on the third day God will live in your sight. Remember, from Jesus to us has been 2,000 years. It's been 2 years. Wash and make ready for 2 days, and on the third day God will live in our sight. We're knocking on the third day's door because it's the end of the 6,000-year period. Remember, from Adam to Jesus, 4,000 years. From Jesus to us, 2,000 years. It's been 2 days. It's been 2 days. And same thing with Jesus saying destroying the temple. What was Jesus talking about? His body? Yeah, he was talking about his body. But if you studied the scriptures, oftentimes you would see where scriptures have dual meanings. More than one. You see that a lot in the Old Testament especially. Was Jesus talking about his body? Yes, of course. But was he also talking about the temple? I believe so. The Jews are ready to rebuild the temple. The only thing that is in the way, I want to say what's on my mind, but I don't want to cause a rift with Muslims. This isn't answering Islam after all. But the only thing that's in the way is the Dome of Rock. If it wasn't for the Dome of Rock, the temple would be rebuilt. They're ready to rebuild. They're anxious to rebuild. It's been almost 3 days. Almost full 2 days. But we're going into the third day. Was Jesus giving a dual meaning? I believe he was. So that's Jeffrey Bartell's theory. You know, all these scriptures, they have this day here and that day there, and you know, the end time prophecies, they're occurring at the end of the 6th day, at the end of the 6,000 years. Everything is lining up. Everything is lining up. So, if this made sense to you, good. That means you understand the scriptures. If you're a little bit rattled and reeling, well, maybe one day you will understand. But I would say, go to the video that deals with the end time prophecies. Understand what end time prophecies are. See the prophecies that concern Israel. See the prophecies that concern the church. See the prophecies that concern nature, and see the prophecies that concern the world. 4 categories you should be looking for. And within those categories, or that body of end time prophecies, learn the key signs, and then know the birth pains. And then know that all the end time prophecies have been happening within the last 100 years. Once you get that foundation, then this will make a whole lot more sense to you. From Adam to us has been 6,000 years. We're knocking on the 7,000-year door. It's been 6 days. We're about to enter the 7th day. From Adam to Jesus was 4,000 years. From Jesus to us, 2,000 years. 2 days. Jeffrey Bartell's theory, the end of the world as we know it.